عقيدتك يا أيها المسلم أغلى من تملك. عقيدتك يا أيها المسلم أغلى ما تملك، فحذاري من المغامرة. لو كنت تملك درة ثمينة فلن تدعها ملقاة على قارعة الطريق. دينك وعقيدتك والله أغلى من كل درة.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، مرحبا يا طالب العلم، مرحبا أخي الكريم وأختي الكريمة، مرحبا O student of knowledge, marhaban, welcome, O beloved brother, our noble brother and noble sister. Welcome to our new series entitled At-Tamheed li Kutub as-Sunnah with Tawheed. At-Tamheed is a word which is a muradif, a synonym for the word muqaddimah, an introduction, or the word madkhal, which is similar to an introduction or an opening where you will discover about something. At-Tamheed li Kutub as-Sunnah wa Tawheed, the introduction to the books of as-Sunnah and Tawheed. And by that we mean Kutub al-Aqidah, the books of Aqidah. And as you can tell by the title of this series, At-Tamheed li Kutub as-Sunnah wa Tawheed, and by the fact that we're talking about the subject of Aqidah, then this Aqidah has a number of names. And there have been books written about this subject using all of these names. So, for example, the word Aqidah, then we have Al-Imam al-Tahawi, rahimahullah, who died in the year 321 after the hijrah of Al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He has entitled his book Aqidat al-Tahawiyya, the Aqidah of al-Tahawi, or Aqidat al-Tahawi, the Aqidah of al-Tahawi. And then we have Al-Imam al-Lalika'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 418 after the hijrah. He called his book Sharh Usul al-I'tiqad Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the explanation of the i'tiqad, another word for aqidah, of the people of the Sunnah and the Jama'ah. Likewise, we have Abu Uthman as-Sabuni, who died in the year 449 after the hijrah, rahimahullah ta'ala, in which he entitled his book Aqidat al-Salaf wa Ashab al-Hadith, the Aqidah of the righteous predecessors and the people of Hadith. And there are others who use this title as well. These are just some examples to show us how the word Aqidah was used, referring to the belief system and the creed of the Muslims. Likewise, from the title, we can see the word as-Sunnah, li Kutub as-Sunnah. When we talk about Sunnah here, we don't mean Hadith, we don't mean Mustahab, we don't mean something recommended. We're not talking about the Ahkam, al-A'mal, the rulings of actions. Is it wajib, obligatory? Is it Mustahab, Sunnah? Is it recommended? Is it Mubah, permissible, makruh, or Muharram? No, when we're talking about Sunnah here, we're talking about Aqidah. And from the first of those who used this term as Sunnah to refer to Al-Aqidah, using this word, is the statement of Shu'aib ibn Harb, in which he said to Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahumullah ta'ala, Hadithani bi hadithin min as-Sunnah. He said, tell me about something from the Sunnah. Speak to me, narrate to me some speech about the Sunnah. فذكر له سفيان جملا من اعتقاد أهل السنة. So Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah, he mentioned, and he died in the year 161 after the Hijrah, he mentioned, after being asked to narrate something about the Sunnah, he mentioned a group of beliefs of the people of the Sunnah. Then we have Abdurrahman al-Qasim, who died in the year 191 after the Hijrah, rahimahullah ta'ala. He has a book called Risalatun fil Aqidah, or Risalatun fi as-Sunnah, Asif. Risalatun, a letter in the Sunnah, and he mentions in it a number of issues of i'tiqad or aqidah. Likewise, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 198 after the Hijrah, he says in one of his writings, As-Sunnatu Ashara, the Sunnah is 10. And in those 10 things that he mentioned the majority of them being matters of aqidah. Likewise, Al-Humaydi, who died in the year 219 after the Hijrah, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, As-Sunnah indana, the Sunnah with us is, and he mentioned matters of aqidah, matters of creed. Likewise, Al-Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah, who died in the year 241 after the Hijrah, he said, Usulu Sunnah indana. And then he said, the principles of the Sunnah with us are, and then he mentioned a number of issues of aqidah, creed. Also, in the name of our series, At-Tamheed li Kutub al-Sunnah wa Tawheed, is the name At-Tawheed. Our third name for this science, Aqidah, Sunnah, At-Tawheed. At-Tawheed, this is one of the earliest, and this was used by the earliest of scholars. One of those who spoke about this was Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 179 after the Hijrah of Al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wasallam. When he was asked to speak about kalam, logic, and tawheed, he said, it is impossible for us to think that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam taught his ummah about istinja, about how to clean themselves after using the bathroom with a certain number of stones or with water, and he did not teach them about at-tawheed. Likewise, Al-Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah, he has a book inside of his Al-Jami al-Sahih, and Al-Imam Bukhari died in the year 256 after the Hijrah. He has a book entitled Kitab al-Tawheed, which is inside of his As-Sahih. And then we have, of course, Kitab al-Tawheed by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 1206. And there are other names. There are other names of or for Aqidah, such as Usul ad-Din. Usul ad-Din, the foundations or the principles of the religion. Ibn Abi Hatim, who died in the year 327 after the Hijrah, he has a book entitled Usul ad-Din, or it has Usul ad-Din inside of its text. Likewise, Ad-Darimi, referred to Aqidah. Ad-Darimi, who died in the year 280 after the Hijrah, rahimahullah, he has referred to Aqidah as Usul ad-Din. And As-Sabuni, who we mentioned earlier, he also refers to Aqidah as Usul ad-Din. And there are many others who have used all of these names. Another name that we have referring to the creed of the Muslims is Al-Iman. Al-Iman. So Bishr al-Hafi, who died in the year 227 after the Hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he referred to Aqidah as Al-Iman. Likewise, Al-Imam Ahmed has a book, Kitab al-Iman. He died again in the year 241 after the Hijrah. And also Ibn Taymiyyah has a number of books entitled Al-Iman, Al-Kabir, and so on, right? The medium and the Kabir and all of this. He died in the year 728 after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The next name that we have, the sixth name that we have, is Sharia. Sharia, the legislation. Imam al-Ajuri, he has a book called Kitab al-Sharia. He died in the year 360 after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the main topic of this book is Aqidah. Likewise, Ibn Battah, who died in the year 387, has a book entitled Al-Ibana an Shariat al-Firqat al-Najiyah. Al-Ibana, from the creed of the saved sect. Having many names shows the importance and the greatness of something. So when it comes to Aqidah, then this is the way for us to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it shows the importance of studying and reading these books, especially with a scholar, so he can clarify to us any vague matters or anything that we may misunderstand. Likewise, it gives us the rules of how to live our lives. It clears for us any doubts that we might have about the religion. Aqidah is a guide to the hereafter. It is the foundation of dealings with one another. The dealings in studying how to deal with this life is the subject of called fiqh. How to deal with others. How to deal with your Lord. Many of these things fall under the title of fiqh. But if fiqh of how to pray, the connection with your Lord, fiqh of how to fast, the fiqh of how to make hajj, how to give zakat, how to marry, how to divorce, if all of that plays a big part, then the fiqh of the aqidah is even akbar, which gives us our seventh and final name that we're going to discuss, al-Fiqh al-Akbar. The fiqh of salah, the fiqh of tahara, the fiqh of water, the fiqh of all of these other things, crimes, punishments, mahar, divorce, marriage, interactions, works, dealings with one another and dealings with your Lord. This is all fiqh, but this is al-Fiqh al-Asgar, the smaller fiqh. While the Fiqh al-Akbar is the Aqidah, the creed. And this brings us to the book that we're going to discuss today, Al-Fiqh al-Akbar of Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 150 after the Hijrah. Al-Fiqh al-Akbar is a book which is attributed to Abu Hanifa, whose real name is Nu'man ibn Thabit. He was born in the year 80, some say 70, some say 77, some even say the year 61. But the preponderant understanding or belief is that he died in the year 80, or that he was born in the year 80 in the city of Kufa in Iraq. He grew up around knowledge, and while he was young, he met some of the Sahaba, Anas ibn Malik, and maybe some others. And so some people consider him to be a tabi'i, a follower of the Sahaba, while others say no, he was young and he did not take knowledge from them, therefore he is not a tabi'i. But for sure he met the tabi'in, which makes him from the atba' tabi'in, makes him from the third generation of Muslims. And while he met some Sahaba and he grew up, and he met tabi'in while he was young, and he grew up around knowledge and around ulama, as Kufa was a place busy with scholars and Islamic heritage at that time, then he grew up selling material, clothing material, until one day, Ash-Sha'bi, who died in the year 103 after the Hijrah. He saw him coming and going, and al-Sha'bi was a tabi'i. He saw Abu Hanifa coming and going, and he said, where is this coming and going from? Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he said, to the marketplace. So al-Sha'bi said to him, you should make your coming and going to the ulama, for I see something in you. After that, he began to sit with his main sheikh, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, and he became a person of knowledge, a person of fiqh, a person of strong argumentation, and a person of status in religion, until he died in Baghdad in the year 150, as we have already said, after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the sources of the biography for Abu Hanifa are many, and the options for you to find out more about him are plentiful, so we won't drag on about that. This famous book, Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, is attributed to him. And we say attributed to him for now because many people deny the fact that this is a book from Abu Hanifa. Some people will say people weren't writing books at that time, although we have books that are older than this, such as the Sahifa of Hammam ibn Munabbih, who was a student of Abu Huraira, and other than them, who have parcels and pieces, as we know some of the Sahaba used to write down what the Prophet ﷺ said. So this is a disputed point. Does Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, the major fiqh, the greater fiqh, the greatest fiqh, referring to Aqidah, does this book belong to Abu Hanifa? You find scholars such as Sheikh al-Albani and other than him who deny the fact that this book belongs to Abu Hanifa. And then there are those who say that it is the work of Abu Hanifa. So you find, for example, Ibn Abi al-Iz al-Hanafi, the great scholar who wrote the explanation of Aqidat al-Tahawiyya, Al-Aqidat al-Tahawiyya, he refers back to Al-Fiqh al-Akbar of Abu Hanifa. Likewise, Ibn Nadim in Al-Fahrast, Ibn Taymiyyah in his Majmu' Fatawa, Ibn al-Qayyim refers to this book being from Abu Hanifa in his book Ijtima' al-Juyush al-Islamiyya. And there are others who refer to this book as being from Abu Hanifa, to the point where Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan was asked about it being attributed to Abu Hanifa or not, and he said that people have doubt about it, just like they doubt in some of the other books. Meaning, as if to say, that doesn't negate that it is belonging to Abu Hanifa. And then they asked him further, some people say that there are phrases or points of creed that are mentioned inside of Al-Fiqh al-Akbar that contradict the correct Aqidah. He said, there aren't any matters which contradict the correct Aqidah in the book. Who said that there are matters that contradict the correct Aqidah? So, as if to establish that this is from Abu Hanifa. So we have two different positions held by scholars of Islam. And hopefully, we're going to bring a third one, not from ourselves, but from the ulama, which falls in the middle of these two positions. And inshallah, we can benefit from that and therefore benefit from the book. We're going to start by looking at the book itself. To answer this question, we need to look at the book itself. We see that there are two chains of narration. From early on, the book was called Al-Fiqh al-Akbar from two separate chains. The first of them being from his son, Hamad ibn Nu'man ibn Thabit, which they usually call Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, and distinguish it from the second book, or to distinguish the second book from the first book, which was compiled by or is attributed to Abu Muti' al-Balkhi, rahimahullah, then they call this particular narration Al-Fiqh al-Absat. Al-Fiqh al-Absat, as if the wider or the vaster fiqh. The first one, Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, which is reaching back to Abu Hanifa through his son Hamad, rahimahumullah ta'ala, is like any other written work, preserving and describing the usul, the foundations of the religion, the aqidah. The second one, by his student Abu Muti' al-Balkhi, is almost in question and answer form, that Abu Muti' al-Balkhi used to ask questions to Abu Hanifa and he would answer. So some of them attribute the book to Abu Muti' al-Balkhi and not to Abu Hanifa. Likewise, some of the people say the book goes back to Hamad ibn Nu'man ibn Thabit, the son of Abu Hanifa, and not to Abu Hanifa. In both of these chains, the one to his son and the one to his student, there are weaknesses. And in both books, in both matins, both texts, there are some creedal issues, some points of aqidah that are mentioned, but they did not exist during the time of Abu Hanifa. So if there are things mentioned in the book which were not points of argument amongst different Muslim groups and sects at the time of Abu Hanifa, how could this be a book of Abu Hanifa? What do we do? What's the answer? Inshallah, this third path in the middle here, we find with our Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdurrahman al-Khumayyis, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, who is a scholar in Riyadh and teaches in Muhammad ibn Saud University. He goes into great detail about this in two different books that he has authored. The first of these books that he authored is called Usuluddin Inda al-Imami Abi Hanifa, the foundations of the religion according to Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, and where he discusses these two books as well as other books that are written or attributed to being written by Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. In the second book, which is entitled Al-Sharh al-Muyassar al-Fiqhain al-Absat wal-Akbar, the simple explanation or the easy explanation to the two fiqhs, al-Absat wal-Akbar, the vast and the great, or the vastest and the greatest, referring to these two different books. In this particular book, Shaykh al-Khumayyis, Hafidhullah, discusses the issue in more detail, because he's not discussing other works and other things of Abu Hanifa. Rather, he's only discussing these two particular books. And he gives a brief explanation of each of these two matins, each of these two texts. As we said, the differences regarding the book Al-Fiqh al-Akbar come in 2 points. Number one, the chain, and number two, the text that it speaks about. As for the chains, the narrations and who they go back to, then many scholars, as we said earlier, have accepted them despite their weaknesses. As for the content, then Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdurrahman al-Khumayyis, he addressed this by saying that there is no doubt that there are creedal points, phrases, things that are mentioned in there from Aqidah which did not exist, meaning there are arguments which Abu Hanifa might have been trying to respond to. There are certain accusations that people have inserted into the religion that Abu Hanifa might have been trying to respond to. But these things did not exist during the time of Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala. No doubt, there are things that exist in the content which should not have existed during the time of Abu Hanifa. However, he says, they were inserted to the original text by deviant groups later on who were seeking to gain acceptance for their group by claiming attachment to Abu Hanifa and by claiming that the teachings that they had and were spreading were actually his, rahimahullah ta'ala. And so he addresses these points in his explanation. If something comes up inside of his explanation of either of the two methods, then he addresses them inside of his explanation. And he also explained that Hanafis, such as Imam al-Tahawi, who brings inside the beginning of his Aqidah the names of Abu Hanifa and his students Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, showing that this is his Aqidah. And Ibn Abi al-Iz, the explainer of Aqidah al-Tahawiyah, they didn't adopt any of these false beliefs that were attributed or inserted into the book, showing that they were probably inserted at a later time, or that they knew what was part of the book and what was part of a deviant explanation that was trying to be inserted. So they were able to distinguish, or it was something that was done later on, trying to promote their corrupt beliefs. So this shows us that the book is from Abu Hanifa, yet there are insertions from other than him, rahimahullah ta'ala. And there are a number of shuruh, a number of explanations of this book, Al-Fiqh al-Akbar by Abu Hanifa. And maybe they reach the number of 15 or more. And if you start counting today with the video explanations and audio explanations that can be found on YouTube and various platforms, then I'm sure they number into maybe closer to 100. But written works, there are at least 15 or so. And alhamdulillah, I was in a gathering today where I was told that there is a brother in the Emirates who has recently explained Al-Fiqh al-Akbar in 500 pages and is to be printed soon, bi-idhnillah ta'ala, after some review. A Salafi explanation of Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. Some of the explanations and many of the earliest explanations of this book were done by Maturidis. And you can study about who they are somewhere else with a sheikh or by looking up certain books. There are some books translated regarding who the Maturidis are by SalafiManhaj.com and others. But there is an explanation by al-Maghnisawi, who was a Maturidi. And there's an explanation which is famous, one of the most famous, by Mullah Ali al-Qari, rahimahullah, who was affected by the Maturidi teachings. However, he also defended many positions of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah that go against the position of the Maturidis in his explanation of Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. And these two, their explanation or partial explanation is what is translated in the English language. So the book Al-Fiqh al-Akbar is translated and they bring notes from these two, Al-Maghnisawi and Mullah Ali al-Qari. So beware that the explanations brought in that translation are the explanations of Maturidis. If you want to go to a video, then I recommend you to go to and listen to, in Arabic, the explanation of Abu Zayd Mekki, who is a teacher or a professor in the University al-Qura. He has an explanation of Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. If you're going to stick to something being read, something that you can read and hold in your hands, then for now, in my limited knowledge and what I have, I recommend you to stick with the explanation or the book Al-Sharh al-Muyassar على الفقهين الأبسط والأكبر. Al-Sharh al-Muyassar على الفقهين الأبسط والأكبر. The easy explanation to the two fiqhs, Al-Absat and Al-Akbar, by Sheikh Muhammad al-Khumayyis. It's only around not quite 200 pages, so it's something easy to read, inshallah ta'ala. In conclusion, I'm going to mention some of the issues that the book deals with. Because by the time 150, the time when Abu Hanifa rahimahullah passed away, there started to emerge different groups, such as the Rawafid, as the Khawarij, as Sufis, as different groups had emerged. And so we find Abu Hanifa rahimahullah addressing some of what they brought. So the book Al-Fiqh al-Akbar, which is by his son Hamad, it discusses Iman in Allah and in the angels, the books, the messengers, the resurrection, and Al-Qadr. It talks about the Hisab, the accountability, and the Mizan, the scales. It talks about Al-Jannah and An-Nar, the paradise and the fire. And later on, he talks about Al-Jannah and Nar again, and how they will not cease to exist. He talks about the oneness of Allah. He talks about the attributes of Allah, those of His essence and those of His actions, Sifat al-Dhatiyya and Sifat al-Fi'liyya. He talks about the Quran and the fitrah that Allah created us on, obedience to Allah and disobedience to Allah, and how it increases and decreases Iman. He talks about the infallibility of the prophets, for those Rawafid who might claim infallibility for their imams. He talks about not making takfir of people due to their sins in refutation of the Khawarij. He talks about the ayat of the Anbiya and the karamat of the awliya, seeing Allah in the hereafter, right? He brings the connection between Iman and Islam, the intercession of the prophets on the Day of Judgment, the punishment in the grave, the virtue of some ayats over others, that there is the mufadilah, there is this virtue of some ayats over others in the Quran, the signs of the hour, and much more. And Sheikh Muhammad al-Khumayyis, Hafidhullah, discusses these things point by point. Then, and he also brings questions and answers, as if this could be a text that could be taught in a university or something. Then in the narration, Al-Fiqh al-Absat by Abu Muti' al-Balkhi, he talks about the definition of Iman, and that this is the afdal fiqh, this is the better and the greatest fiqh, and that whoever denies creation or something which is necessarily known from the religion, I mean talking about atheists, what is the definition of Iman, what is the definition of ability, refuting those who claim that Allah did not create human beings. He talks about Al-Qadr. He talks about going out and rebelling against the leaders, about having doubt in one's Iman, that a believer may be punished for his sins, and that a kafir can believe in certain things from the religion but not believe in all of them. He talks about the obligation of making hijrah, the affirmation that Allah has ulu, or being above, the affirmation of punishment in the grave, the obligation of sticking to the Quran, of dealing with the will of Allah Azza wa Jal, refuting those who make takfir for sins again, attributes of Allah, and much more. So we can see that the Aqidah of Abu Hanifa, as Sheikh Saleh al-Fawzan Hafidhullah said, contains the correct Aqidah. The problem is when you get into the explanations, or you don't have a sheikh who can walk you through some of the difficult points. And another point that was made by the mashayikh when talking about some of these vaguer issues, which may be muhtamal, may be carried on one meaning or another, that we have to go back to the works of Abu Hanifa in whole, and the works of his students, and the works of those who followed him such as At-Tahawi and Ibn Abi al-Iz and others, to answer and find out which way to carry those statements. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, we conclude with this first part of this, inshallah ta'ala, ongoing and hopefully beneficial series, At-Tamheed, the Kutub al-Sunnah with Tawheed, the introduction to the books of Sunnah and Tawheed, or an introduction to the books of Aqidah. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Until next week, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.